Now, since high fuel economy and low CO2 emissions have hit the car makers in the face, most of them are looking at creating downsized engines with turbochargers and superchargers and direct injection and whatnot just to achieve these targets. Ford is no different. In fact, they are ready to debut a new engine in the market. It's called the EcoBoost. It's probably one of the smallest engines that Ford has ever made. And this engine is going to power a car that could become the most successful SUV for Ford India in the recent times. This is the Ecosport, the urban SUV as Ford likes to call it. The stance of this car affirms that fact. The Ecosport will be the first vehicle from Ford India to wear the car maker's new design philosophy. And so you have the narrow headlamps, the new hexagonal grille that is much larger and bolder than what you've seen so far. On the higher spec trims, it also comes with the chrome garnish. However, the entry-level trims are expected to get an all-black unit, and that could make this SUV look like a goldfish. There's black cladding all around the car to give it a relatively rugged stance. But what hampers the design slightly is the absence of side steps and skid plates below the bumpers. Where the EcoSport quickly redeems itself though is at the back. This is where you get the spare wheel on the boot lid. And as Ford mentions, if it's an EcoSport, this is where the wheel belongs. We'll go a step further and say if it's an SUV, this is where the wheel belongs. Let's also take a quick look at the badging. You have the EcoSport badge on the left of the tailgate, while the right hand side gets the trim and the engine badges. As we showed you in our preview, the diesel model wears the TDCI badge, our test mule wears the EcoBoost badge, but the 1.5 petrol mysteriously misses out on the TI VCT monogram. But what is standard across the range is the intelligently designed fifth door handle, which is integrated within the taillight. In fact, the entire car is intelligently designed, because when it is standing solitary, the boot styling camouflages its tiny dimensions. Now, even with a pint-sized SUV like this, I think Ford's designers have done a really good job. And we particularly like the design of the alloy wheels, these funky roof rails, and this little quarter glass on the C-pillar. Now let's go and check it out, what the interior space is like, because this car, like I told you, is really small. Now, the first thing that you will notice when you get inside the EcoSport is the design of the dashboard. It is futuristic like the rest of the car, and it looks a lot more upmarket when you compare it to cars like the Duster or the Ponto. If you look at the center console, it is inspired by the new Fiesta, so you have the similar layout for the buttons and the switches that you have here, and you also have this display on the center console. Now, this is mated to the Sync system. Now, the Sync was developed by Ford and Microsoft together, and Ford tells us that it runs the Microsoft Windows embedded for automotive OS. Now, frankly, in the global market, the Sync is a lot more feature-rich. However, here you will only have the Sync for pairing your phones, which gives you Bluetooth audio, you get telephony, and some basics like voice commands. Now, if you remember, voice commands on the Fiesta were really horrible. That woman had a big problem understanding the Indian accents. This one, though, understands most of the Indian accents that we tried on it.
USB, please say a command.
Play artist Michael Jackson.
Playing artist Michael Jackson.
Now, speaking more about the Sync, if you remember, Microsoft had a similar Blue and Me technology with all the Fiat cars. And a lot of people complained that non-Windows OS phones had a problem pairing with it. However, we tried a Nokia which has Windows OS, we tried the iPhone, we also tried the Android device, and all of them worked pretty well with this. There was some problem with the overall audio synchronization. You had command over the tracks, but you did not have command over voice search for the audio that you have on the iPhone or the Android device. Now, another good feature that is worth mentioning is the emergency assist. Now, what this car does is, in case of an unfortunate accident, if the airbags deploy, the car will gauge this to be a big accident or a major accident, and it will use your paired phone and dial 108, which is the emergency number, and it will also send the GPS coordinates. However, I think for India, they should have reprogrammed this. Instead of dialing 108, it should dial 100, that is the police helpline. Because in a place like India, between an accident and a trip to the hospital, there is something that is called a fist fight. Now below the audio system, you have a climate control, which I believe is going to be available only on the Titanium and the Titanium Plus models. However, once we have the car, once the car is launched, we'll know exactly how Ford places this and whether the low-end models also get climate control. The gear shifter also looks quite good. I like the finish. It has a metallic insert. I also like the feel of the gear shifter and the color combination. However, this gunmetal finish doesn't go well with the silver finish that you have here. There's absolutely no uniformity. And as you move further backward, things start getting a little cramped. You have two cup holders here. You have the USB port, you have an auxiliary port, you have a 12-volt charger, some cubby holes here, you have the handbrake, and you also have the locks for the seat belts. And believe me, it's very, very cramped. Now, like I said, there is no uniformity. There is a gloss black here, there's a gloss silver here, there is a titanium finish here, and there is a scratchy plastics here, which are again in a grey combination. The problem over here is, though the entire design of the dashboard looks upmarket, it doesn't feel upmarket. It feels a little clumsy. If you look at the plastic panels here, they're all too loose. The entire instrumentation shakes. Now, the kind of roads that we have, I understand the suspension is quite good and it will tackle those sort of roads. But over time, all this is going to start rattling. To add to all the cramped feeling that you have here, you have a creature comfort, a center armrest, which can really come in handy on long drives. Also worth noting is the leather upholstery on the top end Titanium Plus. However, the other variants get fabric upholstery, but whatever we have seen, we really like. Ford has made sure that they have the choicest of color options for these seats that go really well with the rest of the interiors. So the seat is set to my preference and the knee room seems decent. Headroom is pretty good. Under thigh support could have been better, but then I have enough foot space so I can always stretch my legs. And if you talk about the seat back, now this is quite upright, but then you can recline it further. So if you're going for those long distance journeys, it shouldn't be that uncomfortable. However, for a long distance journey, I think this makes sense for up to 4 adults or probably a kid in between. You might just squeeze a third adult in the back row, but I don't think it's going to be all that comfortable on a long distance journey. So I think 4 adults and a kid is the maximum amount that you can really look at. More than 340 liters of boot space is what Ford is claiming, but that is primarily because of the height, not because of the depth, and also because of this indentation that you see in the boot lid. Like you see, it's just your regular backpacks that we have fit in here, and it's already full. So I think your weekend luggage might just fit in there, but for a proper long distance travel, I don't think those suitcases are going to go in there. You could always fold these seats if you need more room. But then if you're just 2 people traveling, how much luggage are you going to carry anyway? The big news, of course, is the engine under the hood. That's the 1-liter EcoBoost engine. It's the first 3-cylinder engine that Ford has manufactured. And as is the case with all manufacturers, this is a downsized engine. It is turbocharged. It also gets direct injection technology. Now, the whole jargon apart, this engine produces about 125 PS of power and 170 Newton meters of torque. Now, these are the sort of figures that you will get from a larger engine. The whole idea of this small engine is to give you better fuel economy and the kind of power that we just mentioned. So when you're trotting around the city, there is a turbocharger, but this one has a fixed geometry turbo. So there is that turbo lag as well. So under 1800, 2000 RPM, you hardly have any juice. So when you're overtaking, when you're trying to overtake a long truck, a long series of cars, it becomes sort of cumbersome. But once you're in the turbo zone, it performs quite well. Now, like I mentioned, fuel economy is one big aspect that this small engine is going to play on. Now, Ford is going to claim about 18.9 kilometers to a liter, which is ARAI certified. However, our test car has refuse to go above 7.5 kilometers to a litre, but that is after all the runs that we have done. I think in the real world conditions, between 12 to 14 kilometers to a litre is what you should expect. Now the mixed reactions. When you talk about a Ford, you are looking at a car that handles really well, has a great suspension setup, has that direct steering. Unfortunately, the Ecosport doesn't have any of that. The suspension setup is decent. It is not as stiff as a sedan or a hatchback like the Figo or the Fiesta, nor is it as soft as the Endeavour. It's sort of in between. So it will take on the Indian road conditions very well. It will give you a good ride quality. Handling wise also, it's decent. But the steering, believe me, it feels as if someone just walked from that Ford factory in Chennai all the way to the Hyundai factory and picked up a steering system from there. It just feels like a Hyundai car. It's got a dead at center feel. There's absolutely no feedback. You don't have that direct steering response that you expect from a Ford car. And that is very disappointing. This car that we're driving comes with 16-inch wheels and it is shod with 205/60 section rubber. Now these tires are specifically engineered for the Ecosport is what Ford tells us. However, the tires do tend to feel skittish even at 80 and 100 kilometers an hour speeds, especially when you're changing lanes or going around bends. It's these tires and this steering response that is preventing me from calling this a driver's car. The gearbox is pretty good, the gear ratios are pretty good for the city, all on the highway or around the twisties. It just feels quite good. However, the gear shifter feels a little notchy, and that again is a slight bit of disappointment. So I don't like the steering because it doesn't feel direct. The tires feel skittish, so I'm not a big fan of the grip that this car offers. So is there anything that I like? Well, yes. The highway cruising is one good parameter that the Ford Ecosport gains on, because the noise levels inside the cabin are quite low. So you don't have any sort of noise creeping into the cabin, the engine noise or the road noise. It's quite low. That really helps. In the city, again, the engine is decent, the steering is light enough, so again you can enjoy it in the city as well. So if these basic chores is something that we are looking at, like driving in the city or cruising on the highway, the Ecosport does a pretty good job. Now, the EcoBoost engine does sound quite good, especially when you are revving between the 3 to 5,000 RPM range. So you won't really mind keeping it on the boil every now and then. However, that 125 PS output or the 170 Nm output, that just about feels adequate for this size of the car. And that makes me a little worried about the 1.5 petrol or the 1.5 diesel, which have lesser outputs. I'm not too sure if that is going to be adequate for the kind of car that the Ecosport is. When the car is slipping and sliding around, the passengers in your car don't have any grab handles to hold on to. Because for the Titanium Plus, you get curtain airbags and they had to make provision for that. I like the air conditioning in this car. There are no rear AC vents, but the cabin is cooled quickly. So if you're a nuclear family looking for an urban SUV, the Ecosport could just be your answer, provided Ford prices it right. But if you're in the market waiting for a 5-seater SUV with the space and the utility that an SUV offers, I think the Ecosport's really long wait might just have been disappointing.